Uvalde Robb Elementary School shooting in 2022. People may remember this. I hope you do, because it was one of the most devastating mass shooting events that this country has seen, because 19 little children were murdered by an AR-15 and 2 teachers trying to protect them also murdered by an 18-year-old gunman who was able to get access to a weapon of war when he is still a teenager. I mean, nobody really should have access to these kinds of weapons. AR-15s should be banned, in my opinion, the sale and manufacturing of these kinds of weapons. And that is the major overarching story about gun violence in this country. But there was also a separate outrage that there were hundreds of officers on the scene, police officers. And it took them 77 minutes, over an hour, to confront and kill the shooter. And basically, there was a lot of consternation, obviously. That's way too light of a word, but there was outrage, and the community was heartbroken beyond belief, because these are the cops that are supposedly supposed to be protecting people. This is what our tax dollars go to. Police officers are there to protect and serve, or so we are told. But this was so egregious, and there were so many cops on the scene, hundreds, before they did anything, as children were actively getting shot inside the school while they were on the premises, that the Department of Justice, Biden's DOJ, Merrick Garland, did an investigation into local police conduct, and they found something scathing. They published a report that was just completely damning. They found, essentially, yes, that the facts that I just laid out were true, that those 370-ish officers who were on the scene as kids were getting killed did not act for 77 minutes. And reviews of the body cam footage show that the police officers were saying, well, he has an AR-15. He's got an AR-15. I don't want to die today. They're using different kind of terms. But I'm scared, basically, is what they were admitting, as children were actively getting shot and hiding in classrooms. There was another part of the report and some of the footage that came out that showed that a police officer called into the school and said, hey, is anybody in there? A child said yes, and the gunman came back and fired shots and killed that child, as other hundreds of officers just kind of sat around, because they were, despite being armed with vests, despite this being their job, they were more afraid than the teachers who were protecting their students to go in and actually do their jobs. I mean, the heroes are these teachers who did everything they could to protect those kids. And just this DOJ report shows clearly that there was, I mean, cowardice and incompetence on an almost unprecedented scale here. But the police officers in Texas, and many of them are a part of this kind of Operation Lone Star police force that Greg Abbott is putting together down in Texas. Yeah, they try to give them this kind of badass name. They're definitely not badasses. They were afraid of further investigation into their conduct, and there were reports in the aftermath of the shooting that they were harassing the parents of the victims. And this is Miguel Cirillo, who spoke, I guess, was this yesterday? Or
it may have been this morning, actually.
Okay.
Early this morning.
In the wake of this report, he spoke to CNN's Jim Acosta and responded to it and said basically, like, No. This police harassment and intimidation is continuing.
Did seeing this report, reading this report help at all? What was your reaction to it? What were your thoughts?
The first 5 minutes that I read the report, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't. I was in the rage. I was anger. I was really, really, really mad. So I forced myself to read more, and I just couldn't understand why. Like, why y'all couldn't go in? Like, you know, it's a confusion of everything to me right now. Like, it's a lot of words that I can't say that I want to say to them, but it's just unbelievable that they couldn't just go in that classroom. You know what I mean? It's hard for me. It's very hard and then not only that, I got to see them every day. I live a few houses down from one of the police officers that was there, and I got to see him every day. And it's hard for us. Like I said, it's hard for us every day to see these officers still in the street patrolling and still harassing us every day for no reason. They're just pulling us over for no reason, and they still having them running around in the streets, you know, and not doing nothing, just harassing people.
What do you mean by that, harassing people?
We got a few families, including myself, that they literally they just pulls us over for no reason, telling us to leave Uvalde, telling us all sorts of stuff, because they know that the truth was going to come out and they didn't want us here.
That is unbelievable. But what do you...
I mean, it is unbelievable to a degree, but this is the way that police officers behave, especially in a state like Texas, where they get a shiny badge and they get called Operation Lone Star, and they think of themselves as modern day John Waynes, but only in aesthetic, right? Because John Wayne played characters that had a semblance of bravery and didn't piss their pants when it was time to save innocents. And that's not the case with these hundreds of officers who, by the way, received specific training on responding to these kinds of scenarios. But I think it was a Texas Tribune report that shows it pales in comparison to the kind of training that children and teachers get to respond to what happens when a mass shooter comes into the school. You know, if the ideology is that these weapons of war are necessary for the freedom of Americans, then at the very least, can we have a police force that isn't afraid to engage with those weapons of war when they're deployed against little babies, children in an elementary school?
I said this around the time, but it bears repeating. A lot of the cover that pro-police organizations, police unions, police officers themselves, when moments of police brutality occur, usually use the pattern or like kind of the conventional wisdom in their view that, you know, police officers, when they leave their houses and put on that uniform, and when they respond to a call, they don't know what they're going to find, and they may not come back because they're actively,
right,
consciously, purposefully putting themselves in harm's way in order to ensure the safety of the public. This was that exact scenario, and in full view of the public, with surveillance footage that came out with this long DOJ report, showed that actually when cops are in those circumstances, they're scared they're going to get shot, so they don't do anything and kids get murdered.
Yeah, exactly.
So it really gave a large amount. It really strained the credulity of that argument as to why police officers need that latitude in order to commit acts of violence against people, because they might not make it back if they don't do so.
Did I remember correctly that one of those cops had like a Punisher logo on his outfit when he was not?
I don't fully remember, but it's, I mean,
vaguely.
It wouldn't
they all love
me.
that.
And I also just want to remind people of Angeli Rose Gomez, who was an actual hero in this situation.
I was about to say, yes.
This woman, during that time, if people remember, she was literally handcuffed by the police because she was so adamantly trying to get to her daughter, who was still in the school. She wriggled out of those handcuffs, made her climb the fence into the school, cracked open a window and saved her child. She, as a dogged, intrepid mother, caring about her daughter and the safety and well-being of children in that school, saved someone when the police couldn't.
And it should not go without being said that this probably would not have been the response by the cops if those kids hadn't been, many of them, Hispanic, Latino. It being a not, white affluent school. I'm not even sure about the class dynamics there, but many of the victims were of Latina descent, so or Latino themselves, and that kind of racism and the harassment that man who thankfully his child was not killed survived the massacre. Because he's choosing to speak to the media, that's what he receives in the kind of small town police dynamic that enables that kind of stuff. It really is just sickening. But I'm really I'm happy that the DOJ report is reminding us all of the unfathomable failure at Uvalde in 2022.